June 26, 1977. Market Square Arena, Indianapolis, 11:45 p.m. The heat from the stage was an inferno, and the air conditioning failed to conquer the fever of the crowd. 20,000 people screamed, but the sound was muffled for Elvis Presley. He was in the middle of his last tour, and his body was a public betrayal. The Inca god jumpsuit was a cruel disguise, tight on a body that cried out for help. He was swollen, disoriented, his voice hoarse, struggling to find the melody. His dilemma was not musical, it was existential. He needed a sedative. He needed rest, but Colonel Parker forced him to continue, to feed the machine. The set list was a prison, and amidst familiar hits there was one song he dreaded. He saw it approaching in the script and felt a chill not of excitement, but of profound discomfort. The pianist played the introduction, a melody that was synonymous with success, but which for him was synonymous with loss. He closed his eyes, his face tense. Why did he have to sing that song? He hated the way it exposed him, how it mocked his current misery. The king was about to deliver an agonizing performance of a song that reminded him of everything he had lost. His voice failed on the first note, but he forced himself to continue. The question hung in the air. What was the song that the king of rock hated most of all, and what secret did it hide about the man behind the myth? We know the repertoire. We know Jailhouse Rock, Love Me Tender, The Power of Suspicious Minds. But behind every great icon there is a crack, a vulnerability that is hidden beneath the gold and the spotlight. This is not just the story of a song. It is the story of how art becomes torment when personal life collapses. It is about the betrayal of success, about the burden of having to relive past happiness when you are trapped in painful present. It is the human value we seek, the understanding that even the gods of the stage are made of flesh and blood, and that they carry deep wounds. If you have ever been forced to smile when your heart was in pieces, this story is for you. It is a dive into the emotional backstage of Elvis. Therefore, take a deep breath, relax, subscribe to the channel now, and hit the bell, because the song he hated to sing is the key to the enigma of his fall.
We return to 1960, Hollywood, California. Elvis had returned from military service, and although his mother Gladys had already passed away, he was still at the peak of his beauty and charisma. Colonel Parker pushed him toward a lucrative but artistically empty film career. The goal was to clean up the bad boy of rock's image. In the midst of this desert of films, the romantic comedy G.I. Blues emerged. The soundtrack was pleasant but predictable. There was one specific song that initially was just another sweet, unpretentious ballad, Can't Help Falling in Love. The melody, adapted from a classical rondo, was gentle, lyrical. Elvis, who always loved ballads and had a sentimental heart, sang it with genuine tenderness. At that moment, he was in love with Priscilla, whom he had met in Germany, and the music captured the purity of his feeling. It wasn't just a love song, it was the promise of fidelity and refuge he sought after the loss of Gladys. The song became a resounding success, a wedding standard, the definitive ballad of his career. It represented the hope and the dream of a stable and happy future, the exact contrast to the life of excess in Hollywood. She symbolized the desire to be, finally, the family man and faithful husband he believed his mother would approve of. The public loved it for its simplicity. Elvis loved it for its promise. But innocence was shattered. The Las Vegas machine, orchestrated by Parker, demanded a ritual. When Elvis returned to the stage in 1969, Can't Help Falling in Love became the mandatory closing song, not by Elvis's choice, but by show imposition. It became the final dramatic point, the moment he distributed silk scarves and said goodbye to the crowd. The problem was not the melody, but the imposed meaning. The song, which was born as the promise of pure and eternal love, was now sung after his exhaustive performance in a swollen and betrayed body, to an audience that adored him as a god, but whom he felt did not see him as a man.
Elvis's fall was slow, but the pain of singing that song accelerated with the collapse of his marriage to Priscilla. The divorce, finalized in 1973, destroyed the last trace of that promise of love. And what was the closing song? It was the forced reminder, night after night, that he had failed. He failed as a husband. He failed as a man who sought stable love. The music, which was the essence of his hope, transformed into sarcasm. He had to sing about can't help falling in love while his heart was closed, wounded, and dependent on medication just to function. With every performance, he felt the weight of hypocrisy, the pain of reliving an ideal that had turned to dust. Backstage, he became irritable, demanding changes to the set list, imploring Parker to remove it. But Parker was inflexible. The music was the emotional climax. Money spoke louder. The song he hated was the proof of his misery, the constant reminder that love in his life had fallen apart, and that the legend obliged him to lie to the audience every night. He felt like a sad clown, forced to sing his own tragedy. Amidst his decline and hatred for the song, an unexpected counterpoint and an angel of purity emerged, Kathy Westmoreland, the backing soprano in his band. Kathy was not just a co-worker, she became a discreet confidant, a figure who saw him with compassion, not adoration. She witnessed the backstage agony, the self-medication, the fits of rage and the panic before he stepped onto the stage. She asked for nothing, only offered a calm, gentle presence. She was the symbolic figure of non-judgmental compassion. In moments of panic, Elvis sought Kathy. He confided in her about his fear of death, his guilt over his addictions, and, especially, the torment of having to sing Can't Help Falling in Love. She listened in silence, offering him a tissue, a word of encouragement, never a judgment.
In one of their last conversations backstage, before a show in a small town in June '77, Elvis was paralyzed by the fear of singing the song. He told Kathy, "I can't stand singing this lie anymore. It reminds me of everything I lost." Kathy, with her serene calm, did not try to persuade him. She simply said, "Elvis, to them, it's not your lie. It's their hope. It's their wedding song. Give them the hope, even if you don't feel it." That simple phrase was the turning point in his perspective. He didn't need to feel the love to sing it. He needed to donate it. The song, which he hated for being a mirror of his failure, could be re-signified as an act of kindness for the audience. That advice didn't cure his addiction, but it changed the way he faced the final pain on stage. In that fateful last show in Indianapolis, he stumbled, he missed the lyrics, but when it came time for Can't Help Falling in Love, he looked at the crowd with a different kind of pain. It was no longer the pain of self-pity, it was the pain of surrender. He sang the ballad not for himself, but as a final act of kindness for those 20,000 fans. He distributed his silk scarves, those rituals he so despised, with a genuine emotion of giving. He smiled, but not a forced smile. It was a smile of farewell. He was giving them the last memory of his youth, of his hope, even though hope had died within him. He leaned down and whispered, "We'll see you soon." The necessary lie to close the show. But the true gesture was in the voice. He delivered this song with a final tenderness, as if apologizing for having lost himself, but ensuring that the legacy of the love song would remain intact for them. The song which Elvis hated ironically became the anthem of his immortality. 40 years later, Can't Help Falling in Love is still the most played song at weddings in the United States and Europe. Elvis's pain was transformed into joy for millions. Colonel Parker failed to remove the song, and time proved that the strength of the romantic anthem overcame the tragedy of the man who sang it. The final resolution is that Elvis's art, even the part that caused him revulsion, had a life of its own, greater than his suffering. The song he hated is the one that in fact ensures he is remembered as the king of romance
and not just the king of rock. The song's legacy became the proof that the love he couldn't maintain in his life, he managed to donate infinitely through his voice. His life was a personal failure, but his art was a universal and enduring victory. The story of this song is a meditation on the distinction between the art and the artist. Elvis could not stand the music because it was a mirror of his failed life, but the public loved it because it was a mirror of their dreams. The lesson is powerful. What you create can have a beauty and a healing power that transcend your own pain. The song he hated to sing became his greatest gift. It teaches us that the most powerful legacy is not that of our perfection, but that of our surrender. It reminds us that even in our worst moments, we can give the world something of beauty and hope, even if we have lost our own. May his struggle against his own anthem of love be a reminder. Find your own song of hope, even when life seems like a horror show. The greatest act of courage is to sing beauty, even when you are broken.
May your struggle against your own love anthem be a reminder. Find your own song of hope, even when life feels like a horror show. The greatest act of courage is to sing beauty, even when you are broken, because some stories should not be forgotten. The innocence of that 1960 period was illusionary. Elvis had just gotten out of the army and was under the relentless scrutiny of Colonel Tom Parker. Parker, a master of manipulation and merchandising, did not see Elvis as an artist, but as a mass-market product to be packaged and sold with maximum efficiency. His fear was that the wild Elvis of the 50s would scare away the family and conservative audience. The order was clear: Hollywood films and light soundtracks. The idea was to sanitize the myth. GI Blues was the first step in this cleanup strategy. It was filmed in a sterile environment, far from the energy of rock and roll. The soundtrack was hastily composed, lacking the fire and soul of Sun Records. The recording of Can't Help Falling in Love in 1961 was a technical process, but for Elvis at that moment, it carried a profound personal weight. He was trying to rebalance after Gladys's death and his military experience. He had found Priscilla in Germany and brought her to Graceland, the last desperate attempt to recreate the lost family structure. As he sang the verses, "Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you," he was singing for Priscilla, but also for the memory of a safe love he would never find again. The song was a refuge from the chaos of Hollywood, a promise he desperately wanted to keep. But the irony was that even for the song's beauty, he had to fight to record it. The initial arrangement didn't please him. He insisted on a slower, more vulnerable approach. It was a rare moment when the artist fought against the Parker machine and won. But the price of that victory would be collected later, making it an unbearable obligation. The song exploded. It became the pillar of his global popularity. The world bought the love story, but did not know that backstage the love was already under threat. The decline in the quality of the films and Elvis's artistic frustration were evident. He was drowning in Hollywood, making low-budget musical comedies that drained his soul. The lack of challenges and the total domination of Parker, who prevented any international tour, keeping Elvis trapped in America and in his own mind, created a psychological fracture. The Elvis who sang about eternal love in the movies was the same man who became more distant and isolated in Graceland, surrounded by an entourage that only reinforced his narcissism and paranoia.
He began to hide from the world, transforming Graceland into his bunker. The great ticking bomb began to sound in the 70s in Las Vegas. The pressure of contracts, the routine of 2 shows a night, 6 days a week, was a torture for a body that, at 40, was exhausted and addicted. His physical health collapsed, his heart, kidneys, colon. Self-medication became the only way to survive his own success. The amount of medication provided by compliant doctors was lethal. He needed stimulants to maintain the performance, sedatives to silence the pain and fear.
And at the center of this chemical storm was Can't Help Falling in Love, the closing moment. He had to appear, sweaty, breathless, swollen, and deliver the purest love ballad in pop history. With every note, the pain of the lie was amplified. The song transported him back to the innocence he had lost, the time when Gladys was alive, the time when Priscilla was his young fiancée, the time when love seemed like an easy promise to keep. Now, it was the musical accusation of his personal failure. Backstage, he had fits of rage, threw objects, implored Parker to remove it. "Get that thing out of here!" he yelled at his musicians. But Parker, with his calculated coldness, only reinforced, "It's what they expect, Elvis. It's your finale, your gimmick." Colonel Parker had turned the most beautiful love song into a ritualistic torture. The performance became a mask of suffering. The silk scarves, thrown to the hysterical fans, were less an act of generosity and more a silent cry for help. He would throw the scarf and run for the safety of the backstage, where the pain awaited him. He was physically sick and emotionally destroyed. The song, which should have been the pinnacle of his career, became the symbol of his imprisonment. He hated the song because it forced him to look back at the promise he failed to keep and at the future he knew he would never have. The weight of fame became unbearable, and the anthem of eternal love was his musical tormentor, the constant reminder that he was the loneliest man in the world singing about togetherness. The physical pain and psychological torment united on stage, and the song he hated was the final catalyst for his downfall. Amidst the fawning court and the complicit doctors that formed the Memphis Mafia, there was a figure of serenity, a true angel of support backstage, Kathy Westmoreland. As Elvis's backing soprano since 1970, Kathy possessed a unique perspective. She was not a hysterical fan, nor a parasitic relative, nor an ambitious fiancée. She was a co-worker, an artist, who witnessed the human tragedy unfolding just feet away from her every night. Her presence was discreet, but her look was one of profound compassion. She saw the man behind the sequined jumpsuit, the tremor in his hands, the fear in his eyes before each show. Elvis, isolated by his own fame, began to seek solace in Kathy. She became the only person with whom he could vent about the fear of death, the humiliation of his body, and especially the torment of having to sing Can't Help Falling in Love as the final ritual.
For Elvis, venting to Kathy was a relief from the pressure of being the king, 24 hours a day. In a particularly tense conversation, backstage at a show in mid-1976, he was breathless after the first hour of the show, his swollen fingers struggling to take off his rings. He broke down exhausted and told Kathy, his voice choked, "Kathy, that song, it's a nightmare. It's a curse. I'm the loneliest man in the world, and they forced me to sing about eternal love. It's a cruel joke by Parker." Kathy did not try to rationalize the situation or blame Parker. She acted as a symbolic mentor, a guide. She offered him the shift in perspective he desperately needed. Instead of focusing on the lie he felt he was singing, she invited him to look at the audience. She said, with a calm, firm voice, "Elvis, to you, it may be the song of your pain,
But look at them. Look at that young couple in the front row, at the lady crying in the balcony. That song is the soundtrack to their weddings, to their first kiss. It's their hope. Your pain doesn't have to be theirs. You can give them the hope that you lost." The phrase hit Elvis like a bolt of lucidity. He realized the song was no longer about Aaron Presley and Priscilla. It was about universal donation. It was about the power of art to transcend the misery of the artist. He didn't need to feel the love for the song to be true for the audience. He only needed to deliver the emotion, the legacy, the promise. From that encounter, the act of singing "Can't Help Falling in Love" began to subtly change. It was no longer just a punishment. It became an act of sacrifice. He accepted the song as his burden, but re-signified it as his last gift to the world. His hatred for the music gave way to a deep melancholy and a sense of duty. The gesture of distributing silk scarves, once mechanical, gained a new dimension of kindness and revelation. In the iconic and tragic last show in Indianapolis, on June 26, 1977, Elvis was at the limit of his physical capacity. He could barely move. The closing song, the dreaded anthem, arrived. He started it with his voice faltering, but with each verse, the emotion rose. Not the emotion of his own pain, but the emotion of farewell. He looked at the fans, and the smile he gave was one of immense sadness, of a man who knew he was saying goodbye.
The final act of kindness came at the end of the song. He bowed deeply. He did not carelessly toss the scarves. He extended them with an almost ritualistic devotion, one by one, to those closest fans, as if he were distributing the last crumbs of his own soul. The song became a prayer, a confession of his humanity. His voice, in the final verse, was strangely pure, laden with a melancholic tenderness. He said goodbye with the famous phrase, "We'll see you soon," a necessary white lie. But the true act of revelation was in the way he sang the song he hated most. He was saying, "I failed to keep love in my life, but I give you love through this melody. Guard it, for it is all I have left to give." That stage was no longer a torture ring. It was an altar of donation. And the hated song was his final sacrifice to ensure the happiness of his fans and the immortality of his art.
The song that Elvis hated to sing became the anthem of his immortality, the piece that, more than any other, cemented his image as the king of romance and emotional surrender. The news of his death on August 16, 1977, shocked the world. The legend became a martyr, and "Can't Help Falling in Love" exploded on the charts again, no longer as a movie song, but as a universal requiem. The song became the symbol of the fragility of love and the eternity of the promise. Decades later, the music is ubiquitous. It is played in movies, TV shows, and, ironically, at millions of weddings around the globe. The resolution is the cruelest irony of Elvis's destiny. The anthem of his personal misery became the pillar of his posthumous fortune and the source of incalculable joy for the public. Colonel Parker, who forced him to sing the song until the end, continued to profit from the catalog, but the history of the music was now forever linked to his last breath on stage. The true triumph was not financial, but spiritual. Elvis, by surrendering to the burden of the song, by transforming it into an act of donation for the fans, ensured that the purity of the melody survived the chaos of his life. The artist's pain was transmuted into eternal art. The song he saw as a lie, the public saw as the deepest truth about love. And this contrast is the core of his final legacy. The music he hated is the one that, in fact, saved him from oblivion, transforming the swollen caricature of the 70s back into the sentimental prince that the world always loved. His personal failure to maintain love generated an anthem that teaches the world to fall in love. Elvis Presley's legacy, therefore, resides in his broken humanity, His story is a cautionary tale about the cost of adulation and the danger of isolation. He showed us that success is not a vaccine against loneliness. The hated song is his musical epitaph. It whispers, "The stage can give you the world, but only silence gives you back to yourself." Elvis was imprisoned in his own legend, unable to stop, to heal, to be vulnerable. What is art if not the cry of an artist who cannot communicate in any other way? The song he despised became his last vehicle of communication, the final confession that he could not help falling in love with the idea of love that constantly escaped him. His struggle teaches us a universal moral: be brave enough to fight for your inner peace, for it is the only treasure that fame cannot buy and that death cannot take. May we listen to Can't Help Falling in Love not just as a beautiful ballad, but as the trembling voice of a king who was saying goodbye, and in his last act of surrender, donating the hope he had lost to everyone.